Welcome back to episode 5 of the Decoding Business Behaviours podcast, brought to you by Aspire. I'm back with Terry this week, and we're going to be speaking about the power of communication and how communication factors into behaviours and the behaviour system, and as a behaviour itself, but also as a characteristic in your employees. So, Terry, if we begin with this question. In a behaviour-focused environment, how do you ensure that everyone's communicating effectively?
Well, first of all, it's good to be back. I had a week off, and I know Danny filled in. So, in terms of how do we make sure that everybody's communicating the same language, well, I think it all really starts with having a joint-up approach at all levels, whether that be from consultant level to senior level to director level. And I think when we spoke in episode 2 or episode 3, we spoke about those groups. You bring those groups together, and everybody agrees on the behaviours in the business. And I think it's then talking about what is the common language that we want to use. Yeah. Do we make sure that we're constantly reinforcing it using communication? An example of that and how you get it through the business is we do kickoffs, right? So we do these calls on videos, and different companies will do different things. But for me, it's a way of collaborating as a team and sharing ideas. And on those kickoffs, what I try to do each week is go through one of the behaviours. So let's say it's being proactive, and reinforce that and talk about what proactiveness is, how it works in the workplace. And what we're doing there is we're almost subliminally pushing that message through so people are talking the same language. And I think that's key because often when you talk about behaviours and you talk about being proactive or you're talking about growth mindset, you don't often explain, well, what does that mean? What's the context that sits behind it? And so I try to constantly and consistently reinforce that on kickoffs every day. Sometimes I do a theme for the week, so it'll be a week's theme on being proactive, and we'll talk about that all the way through the week. To get that communication coming back, so it's not just leadership led, what we then do is we ask people at the end of the day to come back and give us examples of when you've been proactive. And what that does, you're starting to get that communication of people communicating what proactive approaches in business.
Peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer, yeah. And I think that's the key thing when you're talking about communication of these things. It's not about just constantly communicating this is what we're doing. Yeah. It's getting people to have real life examples and then communicating them back to the wider business. So it's peer-to-peer, and everybody's then like, okay, maybe I'll try that next time.
Yeah, for sure. And do those messages need to be clear and concise, or are there sort of deeper elements at play with how those messages are brought out?
Well, I tend to use a lot of metaphors, so they don't always need to be super clear.
Relatable.
Yeah, relatable, and I think that's the key thing. Yes, you want to be clear. You want to make sure that today we are talking about growth mindset, but then it's trying to make it relatable. I often try to take all of my examples out of the workplace. Because often when we talk about workplace, people are caught, they're in the trees and they can't really see the bigger picture. When you start using a metaphor, so let's say I use one about football, or I use one about my family. So my family often pop up when I'm talking on kickoffs. People can relate to that because it's real life. Yeah. And I think that's key. Nobody wants a message that is pushed down them constantly. That's not relatable. So I try to relate it to their personal finances, whether they want to go on a holiday or if they want to buy a house, and how being proactive will help them to buy that house, right? Yeah. And people can relate to that, and I think that drives the behaviours both in work and out of work, and if you can connect the two, then you get success.
Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate there, like in the way to put that together. And I think there's a piece that branches off that of, well, you're communicating the message, you're communicating it clearly, but I think sometimes people think about communication only as the speaking part.
Yes.
But there's a listening element to it as well.
Yes.
So how, I'll split this question up, so I'll ask one part now and one part after, but how do you make sure that, or know that someone's listened and taken those messages on board?
Well, I think active listening is a really important part, and if we just focus on that for a second, often when you're giving messages out, and I was taught this when I was taught how to do public speaking, that there's going to be some people in that room that aren't taking that message in, right? Some people take it in, some people thinking about their dinner, some people thinking, thank goodness it's not me speaking up there on stage or on a call. What I try to do is get them to talk back, so the person who is actively listening is me. Because people naturally like to talk about their own experiences, and we have to give them the room and the audience to do that. So I find that the best way to really test active listening is by doing it ourselves. So there's a lot of power in silence. I think often, which is ironic when I'm talking on the podcast, but there's a lot of power in just sitting there and listening to people's examples.
Yeah.
And then the final part, what I tend to do is I listen to their examples and then I talk back and I say, do you see what Ollie did there? Do you see what Amber did there? What they've basically talked about is productivity.
Yeah.
And if you cut beneath the surface, they've also not just covered productivity, they've covered growth mindset, they've covered resilience. So actively listen, get the examples back, and then I reinforce them.
Build them in.
Yes.
And so the other half of my question is active listening or being a good listener a behaviour? Or are there other behaviours where active listening is like an intrinsic trait?
Look, I think it's a key behaviour. I think you have to be, in any business, you have to be an active listener. I think it's a behaviour that you should, I don't have it as a core behaviour, but I think it's something that we should constantly reinforce. I remember someone once saying to me, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth and we should use them, right, in that ratio. Because if you're constantly talking to people and you're pushing a message and you're pushing a narrative, they'll switch off. They just stop listening. We've all been at presentations where the one person is talking in the same tone over and over again, right?
Yeah. And
you switch off. And I think it's so important that we give people the time to talk to us and we just sit there and listen. And when I say listen, I mean actively listen. Now, there's something that sometimes happens, and I watch this in behaviours and try and train people on this, is listening is not someone's talking and they're telling you their example and you're just thinking of the next comeback. So you're not actively listening because you're just waiting to butt in. What I mean is actually sitting back and allowing them to speak with you having no motive.
Yeah.
And just, they own their comments and we have to receive those comments because we don't own them. And that could be good, it could be bad in terms of feedback or if they're talking about their own behaviours, or they could be talking about problems in the business, right? So I'm just going to segue into that. And we have to be able to sit back and actively listen. And it's a massively important trait.
It's not just listening and being able to parrot back to someone, here is what that person said. It's, here's the context beneath that. This is what they said, but you could infer what they meant from that statement, really.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's something I've worked really hard to try and do is when you listen to a statement, what sits behind the statement?
Yeah.
What's the behaviour that sits behind whatever they've said or their example? Because sometimes people, when you're actively listening, they don't listen deeper. And so I just try to reinforce that. But what I think is really important is giving people the opportunity to share their thoughts.
Yeah. And I think on that, how do you, you've spoken about your kickoffs and the wrap-ups, but how do you ensure those open communication channels and that they don't become siloed? So if I work in HR, I'm only ever speaking to people in HR about my things I'm happy about, my grievances, my, this. How do you ensure that the communication channel really is open?
Yeah, I think it's by giving people permission to talk. And when I talk about permission, what I'm saying is you're allowed to talk now. But it's setting up a forum saying, look, today we're going to talk about productivity and anybody can talk about it. I did something about 3 or 4 months ago when I didn't script them at all. And I said, right, I would like a number of different people to do the kickoff in the business. And you can talk about any subject that you like. And we, different people did different presentations, and it was giving them permission that I'm not going to script you. I'm not going to tell you that you have to speak about HR, you have to speak about marketing, or can you speak about this particular level of sales, etc. Talk about what you like.
Yeah.
Right? Talk about what you like. But what we want you to do is to be able to share knowledge with the other people in the room. So of course they can't come on and talk about a loaf of bread that they've baked at the weekend, right? But it was all really about insights. So can you share an insight, whether it's be to do with recruitment or business or the global economies, and then allowing people just to not be scripted and just do it. And then, going back to your point earlier, you can say, look, based on that presentation, can you see they were proactive, they went out and did it, right? They were resilient, they didn't like public speaking, but they got over their nerves. They talked about the growth sectors and how they could grow in that particular area, so there's a growth mindset there. And that's what's great about that, is giving people permission just to not be scripted, forget the job that you're in, your job title, your job function, just come on and talk, present.
Without pressure.
Yeah, without pressure.
Because that's where you'll open people up. I think if you were doing that and going, it's going to be a full company, 300 people, and you'll be on the stage, present on anything you want. you know,
absolutely.
That person's going to shrink inside. But if it's, a smaller setting or a setting they're really comfortable in, whatever that is, they'll open up and they'll give you a lot more, won't they, from that?
Yes.
Are there behaviours we talked about leaders last week, but are there behaviours you look for in leaders to know that they will allow communication? They're not authoritarian, where they'll hear feedback, dismiss it, and never pass it up the chain, good or bad. What traits do you look for in your leaders?
So, you want to get those traits where they allow people to have an open door policy and talk. And I think there's something you can look at, and I think it's all around language. We talk about communication. Language is key. And one of the things I've seen is people who tend to use lots of I language are not very good listeners. People that use we language are great listeners.
Yeah.
Because when you're using I language, and let's say you're a leader and you're saying, I've done this, I believe that, this is what I've done, but they run a team, well, they can't be actively listening to their people because it's all about them.
Yeah.
When they use we language, we have achieved this, or we are going to do that. Where did you get that information? Well, my team, and we spoke together, and this is what we've decided to do. So I think a lot of it is around language and how people talk about their teams in general. Also giving their teams the kudos they deserve. And that goes back to I language.
Yeah.
So if you're running a team and you say, I have achieved X amount of revenue this year, well, you haven't really. You've been part of a team. But if you say, we have achieved, and then you start to single out, Johnny and Dave and Susan, it shows that you're showing the right traits as a leader because you're giving those people the props. And I think that's important.
And which one makes them look better as a leader? I have done this, or my collective have done this? Yeah. My collective, I've got lots of people moving, That sounds so much better. You look better as a leader if it looks like your team is really thriving.
Yeah, and I often say that, and I think I've said it in one of the podcasts, that managers should be selfless, not selfish. And for me, if I help to close the deal, there might be a bit of banter when I go, yeah, I headed it in off the line. But in the main, I want to give that person the kudos because it means more to them than it does to me. I get my joy as a leader from seeing people being successful.
Yeah, there's a Simon Sinek quote that is, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I'm not going to get the wording exactly right, but it's something to do with when you're a leader, your job's not to be in charge, it's to take care of those in your charge.
Yeah.
Your job is not, you're not responsible for the success of sales, you're responsible for the people who are responsible for the success of sales. So the sales figure at the end isn't your result, that's your people's result. You're responsible for getting those people moving.
Yeah, and I think it's that, I've heard a similar saying where they say that leaders eat last, right? Mm-hmm. It's a similar sort of thing. And I think, when you're talking about that communication and giving people the room, the forum to talk, I also think it's about you as a leader, and the behaviour is how you turn up each day.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a very quick example of this. So when I'm doing the kickoffs, of course I'm a human being, right? There's going to be days when I'm not feeling great, right? Or I'm under the weather, or something may have happened, right? It could be anything. But I know, and hopefully my team would tell you this, that I give maximum energy on every kickoff, on every meeting. So when they see me, they only see the best version of me. And I do that not for me, but for them.
Yeah.
That it would not be fair for me to give them anything less than my absolute best. And hopefully that inspires them to do their best. And I think that's the other thing as a leader is you have to demonstrate and show up how you want people to show up.
Energy's infectious.
Yes.
Whether it's good energy or bad energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I once had a boss, long time ago now, and come into the office on a Monday, clearly didn't want to be there, and walk straight past the sales team, I was quite young at the time, and just go into the office and slam the door. And the impact that had on the team was phenomenal. So no matter how good you felt, the moment that door slammed, every single person's head went down.
Yeah.
And that's the power of, didn't say a word, we don't know if they were in a bad mood, right? But it was all about the actions. And those actions, so non-verbal actions, made the whole sales floor dip.
Yeah.
And as a leader, we have a massive responsibility to think about verbal, non-verbal, and all types of communication.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And a kind of segue off your leader there, who's slamming the door. Let's say it's not the business leader; it could be, but let's say it's an employee, right? How do you deal with conflict in a behaviour system? Communication breakdowns do happen. How can they be dealt with differently than in a non-behaviours business?
I think often, let's say you've recruited to the behaviours and you've got the right sorts of people in your business. Sometimes people just don't realise that maybe some of their non-verbal actions have had a detrimental effect on the team. And I think it's important to be able to feed back. And I'm not talking about telling them off, right? I'm talking about feeding back and saying, well, first of all, you want to check in, are they okay? Right? So there could be something going on, you need to deal with it. So you've got to have that emotional intelligence. And I think, it's not about going in and being heavy-handed. You came in and you slammed the door, it's not good enough. They could be like, whoa, this happened at home, and then you feel terrible. So I think it's checking in with them, first of all. Why are they feeling, how are they feeling? Then once you've got under the root of that, let's say that it is something serious, how can you help them? And then trying to almost show them the truth mirror of how that affects other people. And look, we're not asking people to bounce in every day, but it's trying to show people about how those verbal and non-verbal actions in behaviour systems, how they can affect others.
And is that best done in sort of the coaching method, not as a coach, but that coaching methodology of, I'm just going to ask you questions and let you get to the answer, because if you've hired them for behaviours, they should get themselves to the right point to go, actually that was poor communication, wasn't this, wasn't that? Or is it with statements and saying to them, listen, this is how it made people feel, rather than how do you think that made people feel?
Well, I think it's questions. We've already talked about active listening. I completely disagree with taking them into a room and just berating them, and saying this is how you made people feel. It's not good enough. All of that stuff. I think it's about questions.
That's going to go one of two ways, by the way.
Yeah.
They're either going to sink into their chair, or they're going to try and top your energy.
Yes.
And then suddenly you're in a shouting match.
Yeah. Well, more often than not, you have to think about animal instincts. So you take an animal into the corner and you start going at it. It's going to bite you, right?
Yeah.
So we have three emotions as human beings. We have fight, flight, and startle. Okay. So the chances are, if you go in like that, you could be in a fight. Are you prepared for that? You shouldn't be, right? We shouldn't be fighting anyone. And I don't mean a physical fight, but I mean a verbal fight. The second one is the startle.
Yeah.
So you've got someone sitting there who's just, they're not even responding. So now you have no communication. And actually, they're not going to respect you. They're probably closing their ears and thinking about, whatever, when I go home tonight, I'm going to have a glass of wine. And then the other one is flight, where they may just leave and just go, do you know what? I didn't need that today. After all of these things that happened, which, by the way, you didn't ask, the last thing I needed was this. So I think it's always about go in. There is only one method, in my opinion, and that method is ask questions, coach, let them come to, okay, look. And often what you find is people, once they start verbalising themselves, they work it out themselves.
Yeah.
It's almost like a light bulb. They go, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that this morning, but this is what had happened, and firstly I want to apologise, and I'll go out there and I'll put a smile on my face, and it all sorts itself out.
Yeah.
Often without you saying many words at all.
Yeah.
You're just asking questions.
Yeah, you're bringing them to it.
Yeah.
And then I think the last one is, we talked about listening, we talked about communication. Communication isn't just verbal, so it's not just with the mouth. We've said listening's part of communication. What are other non-verbal behaviours that are really important to communication?
I think body language is so important. Eye contact is important. I think the way that you hold yourself when you're around your team, maybe I'll quantify. Are we talking leaders or in general?
Just in general, I think.
Yeah, I think it's about body language. I think it's about non-verbal communication. Eye contact, those sorts of things, because they make up for 70% of what we are as humans, right? So if you've got 70%, I think the stat's something like 70% is non-verbal. I think you've got 20% that is verbal, and then I think there's another 10% which will be written in terms of communication. So if 20% is verbal, a lot of it is then to do with your body. And I'll give you a quick example. So if I'm sitting down and you're talking to me about your career and you really want to elevate your career, and I'm sitting back in my chair and I'm slouching and I've got my head to the side and I yawn without saying a word, how are you going to feel?
Terrible.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, if you're talking to me about your career and I'm sitting forward and I've got a frown on my face and I've got my hands on the desk in an aggressive stance, you're also going to feel terrible. And so it's a really hard thing to teach people. It's that neutral, it's active listening, but actually your body's engaged in actively listening. You're listening with your ears, but also with your eyes. You're connecting with people. And I think it's really underrated, and people don't talk about it a lot, but I think you can tell a lot in terms of people's body language if they're engaged or not.